At a time when the judges still led Israel, and the land was marked by cycles of war, silence, and miracles, a boy named Jotham was born. He was just another of Gideon's many sons, the one who faced the Midianites with a handful of men and courage in his veins. Gideon, the unlikely hero, became a living legend. But like every hero who becomes a myth, he also left behind confusing legacies and cracks in his own house. Jotham grew up among many brothers. There were 70 in all, each son of one of Gideon's wives. It was no ordinary family, it was almost an entire city. But among so many, Jotham was just another name, a small voice in a chorus of strong, opinionated sons. He had no position, no prominence, and perhaps that's why he went unnoticed at first. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like the content, feel free to support our work with a financial aid by clicking on the Thanks a Lot button. You can also become a member of the channel and enjoy exclusive benefits. The place where it all began was Ophrah, a small town surrounded by hills and ancient history. There, the house of Gideon was respected, feared, and watched from afar. But it was also full of tension, because where there are many sons, there are also many disputes, and none was more dangerous than the one that began to form in the heart of Abimelech, one of Jotham's brothers, the son of a concubine, raised with a voracious desire to stand out, a desire that had no break or limit. While Jotham lived in his father's shadow, Abimelech gazed at the throne that didn't even exist yet, but which he already dreamed of taking. And when Gideon died, the ground of Ophrah shook, not because of an earthquake, but because of the silence that remained. Without their father, each brother became a threat, but only one of them had the courage to do what no one expected. Abimelech didn't want to wait for leadership to come naturally, nor was he content to be just another one of Gideon's sons. He wanted it all, and quickly. His blood was the same as Gideon's, but his thirst was different, a thirst for power. Unlike his brothers, who were perhaps still trying to figure out what to do about their father's absence, Abimelech already had a plan, a cold plan. A plan that involved alliances soiled by innocent blood. He went to Shechem, where part of his family lived on his mother's side. There, he planted ideas like someone sowing seeds in a dry field. He convinced the inhabitants that it would be better to have just one king, someone of their own, than to depend on 70 heirs vying for space. The argument made sense to those who wanted stability, and the proposal was accepted with frightening ease. With money from the temple of a pagan god, Baal-berith, Abimelech hired wicked men, unscrupulous people, willing to kill for a few coins and a bit of glory. And that's what they did. One by one, the brothers were killed on the same stone, as silent sacrifices. 69 sons of Gideon wiped out in a single blow. The ground of Ophrah was scarred, and the sky seemed to hold back the cry. But a spark escaped the massacre. Jotham, the youngest, the forgotten, the one who had no voice, ran. He ran like someone carrying something larger than life. As the bodies cooled on the ground, he disappeared into the trees like a whisper that the wind carries away. Nobody noticed, nobody missed it, but fate hadn't finished with him. Days later, the city of Shechem was preparing for the coronation. Abimelech, with the blood of his brothers still fresh on his hands, would be made king. But what no one expected was that Jotham would return. The city of Shechem was celebrating. People gathered in the square, excited, ready to acclaim Abimelech as king. There was music, food, fake smiles, and a strange peace in the air. The kind that only comes after a lot of muffled violence. The stone where the brothers were killed was still there, stained, but nobody talked about it. The past was too uncomfortable to remember at that time. But while the men were raising the new king, a voice echoed from the top of Mount Gerizim. It was Jotham. No one could believe their eyes. A ghost? A survivor? He, alone, standing on the top of the hill like a living statue, shouted with force. He didn't ask for mercy. He didn't ask for justice. He told a story. The trees once came out to anoint a king. It was a fable, a simple tale, but full of poison. He said that the trees went to ask the olive tree to reign. The olive tree refused. So they went to the fig tree. It refused too. Then to the vine. Nothing happened. Finally, they went to the hawthorn, and the hawthorn accepted. But on one condition: if you truly anoint me as king, take shelter under my shade. Otherwise, let fire come out of me and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Silence. The metaphor was as clear as the sun burning the stones of Shechem. Abimelech was the thorn bush. No fruit, no shade, no nobility. Dangerous, inflammable. A king made of vanity and menace. And the people, the cedars of Lebanon, big, proud, but ready to be burned by their own choice. Jotham didn't wait for applause or a response. He turned his back and walked down the hill, disappearing once again. Only now he didn't run away out of fear. He ran because he knew he had planted something that hadn't grown yet, but would. The fable that Jotham shouted from the hill hung in the air like a smoke that was difficult to dissipate. Simple on the outside, sharp on the inside. It wasn't just a story with trees talking. It was a denunciation, a prophecy disguised as a tale. And those with good ears understood the message like a stone in the shoe. Those who ignored it would soon feel the weight of it on their backs. The olive tree, which refused to be king, represented those with real value, people who bear fruit, oil, and life. The fig tree, with its sweetness, was another figure of wisdom, who also didn't bend to power. The vine, a source of joy and celebration, also chose to go its own way. None wanted to dominate. None wanted to be in charge. Only the hawthorn, a creeping plant, dry and full of thorns, agreed to reign, and not with humility. It demanded that everyone bow under its shadow. But anyone who knows the hawthorn knows it doesn't give shade. It only scratches. It only hurts. And if someone refuses, he himself said, "Let fire come out of me and consume the cedars of Lebanon." A threat with a certain address. That was the figure of Abimelech, a man who didn't have the greatness of his brothers, but who thirsted for control. A king who didn't protect, he burned. A leader who didn't guide, he threatened. And the cedars, they were Shechem, tall, strong, confident. But now they were bowing down before the hawthorn, thinking they had chosen well. It was only a matter of time before the fire broke out, until the prophecy took shape. Meanwhile, Jotham disappeared again, not out of cowardice, but because he knew that the story had entered a rhythm that he no longer needed to push. All he had to do was wait, because real seeds take time to sprout. But when they do, there's no holding them back. And the mood in Shechem was already beginning to change. After that day on Mount Gerizim, Jotham disappeared for good. He went to Beer, a small isolated town, far from the prying eyes and dangerous hands of Abimelech. No army went after him. No spies tried to hunt him down. It was as if, for Abimelech, he had died along with the others. But Jotham was alive, quiet, hidden, watching. Meanwhile, Shechem went on with its life with the new king. Abimelech finally had the title he so desperately wanted. He sat on the throne with his chest puffed out as if he were made of gold. But he who lives by the sword sleeps with one eye open, and deep down he knew that reign had no roots. It was like a building on sand, beautiful on the outside, unstable on the inside. Little by little, the city that had acclaimed him began to change its tune. The promises made before the coronation vanished like smoke. The people who had once shouted Abimelech's name now whispered in the corners. Merchants murmured, local leaders looked at each other. It was subtle, but the festive mood turned to suspicion. And in the alleys of Shechem, a dangerous feeling began to emerge. Regret. Abimelech, for his part, became increasingly suspicious. He began to distance himself even from his allies. His eyes, which had once sought applause, now sought betrayal. The crown weighed more than he had imagined, because it's one thing to gain power. Keeping it is quite another. Jotham, even from afar, knew that this kind of tension only grows on one side, that of the breach. He had launched the fable, but it was time that was watering every word. And what had begun as a whisper in Shechem was about to become a roar. People who had previously clapped were beginning to clap back. And in silence, the hawthorn began to spark. The walls of Shechem began to hear more than they should. The buzz turned to criticism, the criticism turned to anger, and suddenly the city that had once raised up Abimelech was plotting its downfall. The people, once silent, now wanted change. And pulling the strings of the rebellion was a man called Gal. Gal wasn't just anyone. He had courage in his chest and venom on his tongue. He spoke his mind, and he spoke loudly. One day, during a feast, with wine spilling out of his mouth and the people around him, he raised his voice. "Who is Abimelech? Who is this to reign over us?" And there, in front of everyone, he threw the seed of revolt straight into the ground. He was cheered. The people wanted to listen to someone who was saying what many only murmured. But the city was still divided. There were those who wanted to overthrow the king and those who profited from him. Zebul, governor of Shechem, was one of the latter, a friend of Abimelech, faithful, or at least interested. As soon as he heard Gal's words, he sent a message on the sly. A warning, a warning. Abimelech didn't think twice. He took his men, and his heart hot with hatred marched into the city that had once called him king. He didn't come to talk. He came to shut them up. It was night when they arrived. The army split into 4 groups and waited for daybreak. Gal, unaware of the trap, woke up ready to face it. But it was too late. When he saw the soldiers coming down the hill like an avalanche, he understood that the war had begun. And he was on the wrong side of history. The battle was short but intense. Gal tried to resist, but soon saw that he had no chance against the man who had killed his own brothers for a throne. He was driven out of Shechem without glory, without honor, with his head down and his eyes full of hatred, a defeated rebel before he even understood who he was dealing with. But Abimelech's problem wasn't just Gal. It was the whole city. Shechem, with its houses, its walls, its alleys full of memories, was now seen by him as a nest of betrayal. And the hawthorn is unforgiving. The next day, the townspeople left as usual, going to work in the fields, thinking that the worst was over. But Abimelech was on the prowl. He divided his army into 3 groups and set up an ambush. When the people least expected it, he attacked with everything. Screams, dust, blood. No one had time to react. The city was taken in the blink of an eye. But he didn't stop there. He went down to the center, tore down houses, destroyed columns, killed without looking back. Shechem, which had once called him king, was now being razed to the ground by the very man it had crowned. As if that wasn't enough, those who survived fled to a tower, seeking shelter. It was their last hope, their last fortress. But the hawthorn doesn't give shade, it burns. Abimelech had dry branches cut down, pieces of wood, anything that could turn into coals. They piled everything around the tower, and without hesitation he gave the order. Fire. The heat rose, smoke filled the sky, and inside, hundreds of people, men, women, children, burned alive. After reducing Shechem to ashes, Abimelech moved on, as if nothing had happened. His eyes, red with hatred and drunk with power, were already on the next city, Thebes. Perhaps he thought he could repeat the same terror wherever he went. Perhaps he believed that the world would bow down to him out of fear alone, but there were some things that not even hawthorn could burn. Thebes wasn't as strong as Shechem, but the people there had something different: endurance. When Abimelech arrived, his soldiers exhausted and his soul even darker, the inhabitants rushed to a fortified tower in the center of the city. It was tall, made of solid stone. Up there, men and women huddled together, determined to fight to the bitter end. Abimelech, blinded by the same arrogance that had driven him there, decided to use the same tactic. He ordered his men to gather wood, branches, dry leaves, anything that would catch fire easily. They surrounded the tower. They prepared the fire, but this time the plan didn't go as well as before. As he approached the base of the tower with a bundle in his arms, a woman, whose name the Bible doesn't even bother to record, looked down from above and saw the king coming like lightning. She picked up a millstone used for grinding grain and threw it from above with both hands. The stone cut through the air in a tense silence. And then, crack! The dry sound of Abimelech's skull cracking was louder than any scream on the battlefield. The man who had built his throne on corpses fell to his knees, his face smeared with blood and his pride broken. He still had the strength to ask his squire to kill him with a sword, just so they wouldn't say he died at the hands of a woman. Abimelech's death spread like a cutting wind. There was no trumpet, no mourning, no homage. The hawthorn fell, cracked, burnt, and alone. No monument was erected. No living memory wanted to bear its name. It was as if the earth itself had refused to keep its memory. And yet, somewhere far away, perhaps still in Beer, Jotham breathed quietly. It's not known how he found out. Perhaps through the mouths of travelers, perhaps through the rumors that cross deserts without needing a road. But the echo from the Tower of Thebes reached him, and with it the weight of the truth he once shouted from the top of the mountain. Every word of his fable had come true as if written in stone. The hawthorn reigned, and the fire came. It consumed the cedars, the towers, the allies, and finally he burned himself. But Jotham didn't come back. He didn't show up to say, "I told you so." He didn't seek the limelight or glory. After launching his message, he preferred anonymity. He chose silence as his home. The Bible doesn't tell us what became of him after that. No verse describes his last days. No record marks his death. And perhaps that's the point. Jotham was not made for the spotlight of history, but to be a reminder within it. A simple man with no army, no crown, no followers, who faced a king with a story, a parable that cut deeper than the sword. And even though he has disappeared, his voice remains, a whisper through time, saying that not all power is firm, that not every throne is eternal, and that sometimes all it takes is a stone thrown from on high to end a tyrant's reign. Jotham's memory was not marked by conquests, titles, or great deeds. He built no cities, commanded no armies, and had no statues erected in his honor. But even so, his story lives on. Not in stone walls, but in the words that came out of his mouth. Words that became seed, grew, blossomed, and finally exploded like thunder. Jotham was the man who warned, the only survivor of a massacre. The forgotten brother who, even alone, had the courage to climb a hill and tell the truth that no one wanted to hear. And he didn't speak with desperate cries. He spoke with a fable, with wisdom. He used his voice as a sword and history as a shield, not to take revenge, but to warn, not to accuse, but to show the path they were choosing. While Abimelech ruled by muscle, Jotham won by spirit. While the king built with fear and control, Jotham sowed meaning. And even when he was gone, even when he was silent, his presence hovered over everything. With every step Abimelech took, Jotham's words followed him like a shadow, as if fate itself had stopped to listen to that fable before deciding the end. He didn't have a stage, but he had an impact. He had no crowds, but he changed the course of history, and perhaps that's the most real strength of all, that of someone who doesn't need to be remembered to have made a difference. Now, looking at everything that happened, from the massacre of the brothers to the fire in the towers, from the stone thrown to the silence that followed, it's hard not to wonder, what does this story say to us today? Jotham's story doesn't end with fires, nor with a happy ending like in an old book. It ends in silence. But it's not an empty silence. It's the kind of silence that makes you think. It stays. It bothers you. Because in the end, he didn't come back as a hero. He wasn't crowned. He didn't claim anything. He just let time do what he knew it would. Jotham teaches us that not every call comes with trumpets. Sometimes it comes with pain, sometimes with loss. He wasn't chosen to fight with a sword, but to speak out when no one else had the courage. And he did it in the simplest and most powerful way possible, with a story, a metaphor that pierced the pride of men and planted doubt in the hearts of those who heard it. But more than beautiful words, it was his courage that marked the way. He didn't remain silent in the face of injustice. He didn't bow his head to corrupt power, and even without support, even without resources, he chose the truth. That takes strength. It requires faith. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson, the value of a firm voice in the midst of chaos. In times when so many people shout to impose, JOTAN spoke out to warn. Instead of making noise, he made sense. And even though he was forgotten by many, he was remembered where it really matters, in the history that shapes us, in the faith that guides us, in the conscience that nudges us when we see something wrong. It's not about being great, it's about being right. And when you look at his life, you realize that God doesn't need crowds to act. Sometimes he uses just one, a survivor, a middle child, someone forgotten in the corner, someone like Jotham. And whoever listens, whoever pays attention, will never see thorns the same way again. If you liked JOTAN's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.